Hi there, thanks for watching. In this video, we're going to look at the various different mobile application development frameworks, tools, and technologies in 2017. So I want to start off with Ionic and the WebView-based frameworks. So as you may already be aware, Ionic framework is based on Angular, and it allows us to make powerful applications with our Angular code. Now, one of the benefits of this, if we even just hit explore the documentation, is that Ionic is really easy to get up and running with quickly. So if we wanted something like an action sheet, we could just simply hit show action sheet here, get a demo on the Ionic framework site, and then just simply take this code here and place it inside of our application, and it just works. Now, one of the great things about this is that in most cases, unless you're using some sort of native thing that doesn't work in the browser, the application will just work out of the box on the mobile device as well as a web browser. So you can take the projects that you build with Ionic and you can place them straight on the browser on a website without any issue. Now, this does come with a drawback, and the drawback is that it's a bit harder to make native integrations when compared to some other frameworks like NativeScript, but it's certainly not impossible if you want to get started with Cordova-based development. There is ways that you can do that relatively easy, but it's just another learning curve. Other things like performance have been mentioned before with things like Ionic. I personally haven't found too much of a bad performance issue with the framework itself. It's more just specific limitations of the WebView in places where you really shouldn't be using a WebView-based app. If you're really looking for complex 3D graphics or maybe just thousands of things on the screen, then, Ionic does offer things like the virtual scroll for thousands of things on the screen at least, but as far as the complex 3D graphics, well, there's probably better things out there than using HTML5 for that anywhere. So as far as performance goes, I think really we're going to see a lot more of this as the time goes on with progressive web apps and the web just getting more powerful. We have things like native share now and the web payment API. All of these sort of progressive web application features are going to push the web forwards in the coming months and years. I think it's really important to just not write off frameworks like Ionic just because they use a web view. I think the web is allowing us to make applications that load up in literally milliseconds rather than waiting a few seconds in some circumstances for native applications. Web applications seem to be much smaller when bundled too, and that seems to be the way of the future, but there are other options, and I do recommend that you try them all. So the next thing we're going to look at is, of course, things like Framework7. This is another HTML-based framework that allows us to build hybrid mobile application and web apps. Good thing about Framework7, it does have things like Vue and React options. I think really in order to survive as a mobile application framework in today's sort of market, you really need to be building things with web components and allowing that to be cross-platform. This does go back to things like Ionic 4 and the Stencil compiler, which allows us to make mobile applications with web components very, very quickly. From what I've heard, you should find that the performance does go up quite a bit when building things with Stencil, and as well as that, it just works cross-platform out of the box everywhere. So back to Framework7, you will find a lot of similarities to Ionic here. We have iOS and material themes, as well as things like navbars, pull to refresh, and all of the components that you'd come to expect from a cross-platform framework. I definitely recommend you try them both out. You may find that you like one more than the other, but I think it's really just one of the same category at this point. Other interesting applications and frameworks that you may be interested in are things like Quasar Framework. This allows you to build applications and websites, and even Electron-based applications, all with the same code base powered by Vue. You have different things like the material theme and the iOS theme, all with a vast amount of components that allow you to get up and running with web applications super quickly. And then we start to get to the other side of the spectrum. We're now building applications with JavaScript still, but now we're able to use things like Angular and TypeScript to build native applications. So why would you use NativeScript over something like Ionic? Well, there's a few reasons why you may want to consider that. I'm not saying any of these things are the best choice for you. That depends on your team, and that's something I'm going to say a lot throughout this video, is that this honestly depends a lot about where the skills are inside of your team and what the business requirements are for your application. Now, there are ways to build the same NativeScript application out with that Angular code base for the web and for native. That is possible. I have actually made a course which may be released, it may not be at this point, depending on when this video gets released, over at nativescripting.com. That's Alex Ziskin's site, and I do actually have already an NGRX course out there which shows using NativeScript and NGRX. That will be updated very soon, but I did want to get this Angular application for both web and native course with NativeScript out there first. So the reason that you may want to use NativeScript is that you literally just need that native performance for whatever reason. The components that you develop with your NativeScript application are entirely native, so when we're building a label inside of our NativeScript apps, it is a literal label for iOS and Android. It's not simply a H1 or a label tag in HTML. We're also able to integrate things like Gradle and CocoaPods plugins relatively easy with little stress, and we have things like TypeScript to help us with that, so we're able to interface with the sort of native environment within our JavaScript and TypeScript very, very easy. Once again, you can take advantage of the skills that you already know, so you can get started with TypeScript and Angular, and you can basically reuse your skills from Ionic with NativeScript very simply. I think that's just worth trying everything. If you try out NativeScript and you find that you like it more than Ionic, then go with NativeScript. I'm a big fan of NativeScript. I use it in a lot of my projects. I teach a lot of courses around NativeScript. I'm also a big fan of Ionic. Just both platforms and both frameworks allow you to have different sort of strengths and weaknesses in different scenarios. If I'm building an app for the web, well, a lot of the times I'll just run straight to Ionic to get things prototyped really quickly. If I really want to go for a big release and potentially there's some iOS and Android SDKs that I want to interface with on the native device, but I can't find a Cordova plugin for, then NativeScript offers me a little bit of an easier sort of way of interacting with those SDKs. So in those circumstances, I'm definitely going with NativeScript. But like I said, it depends what you want and what your project needs. I definitely put NativeScript as most likely one of the best sort of mobile application frameworks when it comes to developing things with Angular. Next, we have things like Appcelerator. Now, Appcelerator allows us to write our JavaScript once again and take advantage of that native code. Now, I really haven't used Appcelerator too much, so I can't really go into the specifics, and I don't really want to make too much of an opinion without sort of having a justification why. So what I would recommend is that potentially you check it out, you see whether it works for you, whether the platform is sort of stable from your point of view and it's something you like to use. If it is, then jump on board. It may be perfect for you and your team, it might not be. We then go into things like native development. So this is literally just developing something for iOS or developing something for Android. And that also comes with its benefits. So this allows you to have full control over the platforms that you're developing for. A lot of the other products that we've looked at so far allow you to have a lot of control. I mean, we can even go back to things like NativeScript that allows us to have a native application and style it with CSS. Now that's really important. Styling something with CSS for native is actually quite fun. But we do run into slight limitations. You may find that, look, there's just something you really want to do with iOS and it might not be as easy or might not be as possible with NativeScript that you certainly can do with a native application. At least that's as far as styling goes, and that really does depend on your business requirements. Another reason that you may want to interface with something like Xcode to develop iOS applications rather than cross-platform is maybe the first reason, perhaps your client only wants an iOS app. Secondly, you may want to integrate things like the Apple Watch with your iPhone application. It's not really possible with a lot of the cross-platform frameworks at this point. And you may just find that where you're living, a lot of the jobs are actually more iOS than cross-platform. So really, it's going to depend on, once again, your team, where you're at in your development career, and what you really want to focus on. Perhaps you just like iOS and you know everything about iOS and you want to be an iOS developer. Go do that. Nobody's stopping you. I really think it comes down a lot to what you want to do, and the sort of, maybe you like Swift more than Angular or JavaScript or anything like that, and you really want to sort of dive into that ecosystem. Go ahead, if that's what makes you happy at the end of the day, do that. Next, we have things like Android Studio, and that does allow us to create native applications with Java or Kotlin. You want to run into the same things as the native iOS development at this point. You can only really develop for the one platform, but you have tight integration with all Android devices. So maybe things like the Android TV, the Android Auto, the Android Wear. You're going to be developing applications that interface with those devices across those different sort of applications. Perhaps once again that you're just a big fan of material design and the way everything works. Maybe you just want to be an Android developer. That's totally cool. It may just be once again where you live. There's not really many jobs around for the cross-platform stuff, and it's something that you want to do instead. I definitely recommend you try it out. You might find that, at the end of the day, you don't really want to develop for any other platform, and there's no pressure to do that. If you're happy where you are and this is something you want to do, then go ahead and do native development. Then we run into things like Fuse, which uses JavaScript, but uses this UX sort of declarative markup. And I really am a big fan of the way Fuse allows us to make applications that look nice, that feel nice, and are nice to develop. We have things like the Fuse Studio, which has tight integration with all of the tools within Fuse. So we have this sort of layout thing similar to Xcode. And we have these sort of different panels here on the side. So this does allow you to make cross-platform applications with JavaScript and the UX markup language. I do have a course on Fuse that you can check out at paulhalliday.io if you'd like to get started developing apps for Fuse. And like I said, I am a big fan of the way this works. Creating animated user interfaces with Fuse is relatively easy. I mean, if we just look at this piece of markup here, we can see that we have a circle which has the color of green, width of height of 50, and has the scaling of a factor of ×3. So this allows us to scale the circle by a factor of 3. We find that inside of the markup itself, it's easy to say exactly what you want rather than how to do it. So we want to scale this circle by a factor of 3. It will simply do that. We can add other things like timing elements to this, rotations, translation X and Y, etc. We can also look at how we can use third-party SDKs with Fuse, as well as a lot of native integration. So if we look at things like the camera, super simple, camera.takePicture, etc. So we are able to use JavaScript once again to make native cross-platform applications. Of course, at this point, Fuse is not as big as the other platforms, and I really would like to see this grow. So if you're a big fan of Fuse, let me know. Show me the stuff that you've made inside of the comments. I'd love to see what you've made with Fuse and what you're currently thinking about making on this platform. Another thing that we have is things like React Native, and React Native allows us to make JavaScript-based applications with React across iOS and Android. Now, this is another one of the really popular front-end tools to develop applications with JavaScript and React. So I would recommend this if you like the way React works and you're a fan of React, then React Native is most likely going to be the project that you just run to straight away. See, one of the big things about working with the Angular frameworks is that, at the end of the day, you most likely like Angular, and that's the reason why you're doing that is because, underneath the hood, you're using Angular every day. You're simply just using, most parts, a UI library with things like Ionic, and obviously it does provide things like routing as well, so I'm not really trying to subsidize that into simply just being a UI library, but you understand that at the end of the day, you're using it because you're a fan of Angular in the most part. When it comes to using React Native, you're most likely a fan and you like to use React Native in the code that you write. Or I should say React, rather, you like to use React on a day-to-day basis. So once again, like I said, we can take advantage of native UI components with sort of React Native. We have access to different APIs, so we have things like the camera roll once again here inside of React Native, as well as documentation on how to use this. So once again, it's quite a simple implementation, camera roll, don't get photos, and you're going to find a lot of the things that do come with these sort of frameworks and tools is that they have subsidized a lot of the features that you would need to access in a standard business application. Things like the camera roll, alerts, animations, etc. are all usually really easy to access, and a lot of that work has already been done for you. You'll find that React Native applications are very performant and are used in industry quite a bit. It is going to be a framework that you should spend time learning. If you want to use React and you do like React, you should find that you should be able to get some jobs in this industry. And it would be a good choice for you if you're interested in using React. So it does have a lot of big backers. We have obviously Facebook, the Facebook adverts here, things like Instagram. So a lot of the Facebook stuff obviously uses that, but also things like Airbnb, which is a big pioneer in a lot of the JavaScript stuff. We have Skype, Tesla, Walmart. So a lot of the big companies are using this and investing in this technology. So you certainly can't go wrong if you like React when it comes to developing cross-platform stuff with React Native. Finally, I'm going to end on Xamarin. Now, Xamarin has been around for a while, and it does allow us to use things like C# to, of course, make applications for Android and iOS. So this is going to be another thing if your team is sort of a lot of the enterprise-based sort of companies are using C# and sort of Microsoft stuff for the backends. You may find that Xamarin just works well in that sort of area for you and your company. So once again, a lot of the things that I teach and a lot of the things that I work on are not really based on C# or anything like that. So most of the stuff that I do at this point is simply just JavaScript front-end, back-end based stuff, but all usually in the JavaScript ecosystem. So once again, I haven't really spent too much time with Xamarin, but I am actually looking to spend a bit more time with it so I can sort of maybe teach some of the stuff. Maybe you can learn with me on the channel. So I don't really have too much to say about it other than if you're using C# in your company, on your industry, it's the skills that you like, then your team is most likely going to want to try Xamarin before the other frameworks and tools. And a lot of this, if you notice, like the answer is always coming down to the same thing as, hey, it really depends on what your company's skills are. It's pointless retraining an entire organization, team, whatever it is, to this other platform if you could simply just take advantage of the skills people already have. A lot of the time it just comes down to sort of marginal percentage differences on just how much you can do with these different frameworks and tools. If you're good at using C# and it's what your team uses, then I'd most likely just run to straight using Xamarin. And then you don't have to spend a lot of time, money, and effort sort of training up this whole team if they are sort of industry-based. I mean, Xamarin is backed by Microsoft and used by a lot of enterprise companies, so at the end of the day, don't waste your time reskilling if you don't have to. So what's my conclusion in all of this? We've looked at everything from things like Ionic framework to Stencil to Framework7, all the way to things like NativeScript and Fuse, etc. Well, my answer to that would be do whatever makes you happy. I would try every one of the frameworks that you're interested in. So if you're interested in maybe using Ionic because you've looked at the documentation and you think, you know, this could be for me, try it in a few projects. I have lots of videos on how you can get started. I even just released a course on how you can get started with Ionic and Firebase here on the channel. Try it out, it may be perfect for you. In other circumstances, maybe NativeScript is better. Maybe you're just more comfortable with integrating with something like native Android and iOS SDKs and APIs, but you want that cross-platform approach. Go with NativeScript, try that. It might be good for you, it might not. Then obviously, if you only want to develop for one platform, well, I mean, the choice is already there for you, isn't it? If you want to develop for iOS, well, then, you know, you're stuck with developing for iOS with Xcode. That might be something that you like, it might be something that you don't like. Recommend you try that as well. Same goes for Android Studio, and when it comes to tools like Fuse, I would definitely check that out if you're interested in sort of making sort of declarative user interfaces with the UX markup, and you really want to take advantage of the 60 FPS animations, the easy layout and interfacing with sort of native APIs. I definitely recommend you check out Fuse for that, and you have things like the examples here, which teach you quite a few things, you know, how to use pretty much everything, how to make a sort of list item to detail view, which creates this sort of animation. I mean, you can't really argue with that, it's good animation, and it teaches you how to do the full thing with the full example. So maybe Fuse is the set of tools for you. I do have a course over at paulhalliday.io, which teaches you how to make mobile applications with Fuse. Or maybe React Native is what you want. If you like React, then I would definitely just jump straight into React Native. You don't have to reskill up, you don't have to learn anything. I would just definitely dive into that, try it out, see whether it's for you. If it's not, then, you know, at least you've learned something new. If it is, there you go. And of course, if C# is for you, then Xamarin is most likely the choice that you're going to want to make. So my conclusion after all of that is simply to, if you have skills already, for example in Angular or React, try those frameworks first. If that doesn't work out for you, I mean, don't even think about performance, don't think about anything for now, just simply think about making applications and user experiences. Don't be married to the framework at all, just simply, if you're good at these things already, try those tools and frameworks. If that works for you, perfect. If it doesn't, consider other options. The worst case scenario in all of this is that you've learned something new. So that's my review of the various different mobile frameworks and tools. I'd love for you to tell me why I'm right or even why I'm wrong inside of the comments section below. Don't forget to check out paulhalliday.io for more courses and premium tutorials, as well as my Patreon at patreon.com/paulhalliday. Subscribe to ensure that you keep up to date with the latest videos, and with all that in mind, I'll see you soon in my next video.